Good evening and welcome everyone to the July meeting of the San Diego DX Club. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Danny, if you could lead us in the pledge.
Thanks, Rob. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll have Bud WX6V introduce our speaker tonight.
Hey, everybody. We got Jim Venneman tonight, WX6V, who's up in the little town of Auburn, just north and east of Sacramento, right there, Jim?
Yeah, we're about 35 miles east of Sacramento.
Yep.
Pretty hot up there. Pretty
My
hot
cousin,
up there. 103 today up here.
Yeah, it's hot up in there. And it was just at my cousin's house in Pilot Hill a couple of weeks ago. And Jim's on honor roll DXer and is going to talk to us tonight about DXing with low power and modest antennas. So great for a lot of us guys who are stuck in HOA neighborhoods or whatever and not able to have the big gun kind of stations that we'd like. So I guess without further ado, we'll get Jim to kick off and let's go.
All righty. Well, first of all, I appreciate you asking me to join your meeting here this month. Appreciate the opportunity to present this material. This is a presentation I put together for DX University that was held on the Friday before the Visalia convention here a couple months ago. And we had a pretty good attendance at that. I think I had about 50 or 60 guys in the room for this. So they were all newbie DXers for the most part and wanting to know how to go about working DX. Okay, I gotta, oh, wait a minute. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen here. It says I gotta send a request and you guys have to approve it, I suppose. Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, let's see. All right. All right, so you can see my screen here. All right. Let's, all right. So this presentation is called Working DX with Low Power and Modest Antennas, with the caveat of look out, there's frustration ahead. But I could also call this, what was I thinking? You want me to do what? Seriously? Wow, I don't know. But I think the thing I want to get across is, yes, you can do it. I think we would all agree the conditions are pretty good right now for DXing. The solar flux is up on cycle 25 is what, about 175 to 180 between those two numbers today. It was up 200 the other day. Signals on the top bands are pretty good, even though we're in the summer doldrums. So these signals will get a lot better in these upper bands in a couple of months. And you can work DX on these bands with low power and modest antennas. It's not all that hard. There's a lot of stations to work and there's a lot of DX editions that are out there. But all that being said, we still have the same challenges to work DX, especially the rare ones, because stations with a geographic advantage are going to get through first. Stations with big antennas and great locations and running high power have a big advantage. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to wait in line for any of these stations to work DX yourself. So a little bit about me. We already talked about me in the introduction. So I've been licensed since 1961. I originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. I got my novice license in 1961. Moved out to California in 1984. Here's some QSL cards that I've had over the years, starting with the one at the top when I was in Cincinnati. That's the Delta Queen, which operates up and down the Ohio River. Actually, in Sacramento, which is down the road here, we have the Delta King, which goes up and down the Sacramento River, the sister ship for that one. I got that W6PYX after I moved to California. That was back in the 70s, I think. And then when the first day of the vanity call sign program, I opted to get a new call sign and got WX6V. So that was in the 90s. I got my DXCC in 1965. I'm currently at 338 work, so I have two more to work. Mount Athos and North Korea. Not that I haven't had the opportunities to work those two. I've been in several pileups on Mount Athos, but getting through the East Coast wall on that one is not easy. And P5, I have a little story about P5. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago. There was a Polish operator who was allowed by the North Korean government to put on a demonstration and operate for a limited time with 100 watts on a vertical. And all of us here in Northern California knew when he was going to be on and what band and when. And so I was there and he was there, and he wasn't very strong. He was on CW with about a S5 or S6 signal, just above the noise. And of course, he had a pileup of all the guys around here, and all the big gun stations were working him. And I was calling, but I knew I was going to have to wait in line. And it was looking pretty good because, the bigger stations had worked him, and my turn was coming up. And I was just about to call him, and that's when the solar flare arrived. Yeah. I didn't know it at the time. I just noticed that on my receiver, all of a sudden the noise picked up, and what the signal had been copyable is now not copyable. I get bits and pieces, and yeah, the solar flare took him right out. And I stayed on for a while, hoping maybe conditions might improve and the signal might come up, but never happened. And I say that to mention that, I'm going to talk about ways to work the X, but even though if you do all your homework and you're in the right place and the right time, propagation's great, the universe can still work against you. I got to work with the X. So, excuse me, my wife is. All right. Anyway, so my DXCC is 338. I get 322 on CW, 303 on phone, and 285 digital. And I got my 5-band DXCC in 2008, all on low power. And I'm working on my 5-band worked all zones. I still need one zone on 10 and about 7 zones. I'll probably never get on 80, but I'm still trying. I was a field day coordinator for 20 years, and I won the Pacific Division sweepstakes a couple of times on low power CW and phone. So that's what I am. What I'm not, you won't see any articles in QST or CQ about me because I had a big station or I had some great accomplishment in a contest or anything. I don't have a tall tower or stack beams or high wires. I don't even have the latest ham gear. I've only owned 2 brand new transceivers in my time, and those were as gifts. I didn't buy them myself. And I'm not someone that has extraordinary operating skills. I'm going to talk about what I've done to work DX. When they asked me to make this presentation for DX University, they said, we want DXers that have had success to come and share their experiences and how they did it. Not that what I'm going to say is the only way to do it or the best way to do it or the preferred way to do it. It's just what I did. And if you can use any of those things to help you, then that's great. But I learned through experience and then mentoring from some great operators that belong to some great clubs around me and in my neighborhood. Well, my mixed DXCC count is pretty high. So sometimes people ask me, well, what do you do to operate? I mean, you only need 2 countries. So what do you do? Well, I work bills to fill in countries on modes or bands, and I work DX contests. I belong to a couple of contesting clubs, and I get in those and work DX events as a part of a team. I like to get in the California QSO party because I'm kind of a rare county here in Placer County. I like the WPX contests because I have a great call. I'm a mult, and I like sweepstakes. And but mostly I work DX Marathon. If you're not familiar with this, I've been active in this since 2009. DX Marathon is the thing where you start at 0 each year and work as many countries and zones as you can by the end of the year. And that kind of appeals to me because it keeps my DXing skills sharp, and it enables me to keep my station and antennas in great condition. I don't want to have Mount Athos show up on the air and I hop out there on the radio and discover that I've got some kind of a problem with a a connection in my station, or something's going on with my antenna or my feed line, and I have a high SWR, and I don't want that, obviously. So doing this keeps everything up to date, and it keeps me in the game as to what's happening in the world of DX, because I'm taking a look at what's coming up and who's going to be on and when and where. And I get to compete against some of the best DXers in the world. And I like that. I had my 2023 score at 272, which is 232 countries and 40 zones. That put me in 30th place out of about 350 participants in the digital only class. And it also put me in 200th place in the unlimited class. The unlimited class has hundreds and hundreds of participants now. And top score last year was 329, which is 289 countries and 40 zones. So that's kind of gives you an idea of the kind of activity that's out there. All right, little sound effect here. We're going to go back in time a little bit. Back in time to my past station setups. This is what I started with. Up here on the left, my very first station as a novice operator in 1961. A Hallicrafter's SX100 and a Heathkit DX20, about 50 watts, crystal controlled, 40 CW. I didn't know anything. I knew enough to go to the FCC examination station in Cincinnati and pass the test and pass the 5-word permitted code test. But how to operate a station or set one up, I knew nothing. And so I was looking at QST and saw these great ads for Gotham Verticals. And the old timers that are in the audience here may remember the ads for Gotham Verticals. It sounded like a great idea. They were cheap. It sounded like I was going to work the world. So I didn't know. We didn't have any trees in our yard, so I couldn't use any trees to set up antennas. So slapping a vertical on the side of the house seemed like a great idea. So we bought the Gotham Vertical, and it came 23-foot long aluminum tube with a BMW coil on it and very limited instructions. Well, I didn't know what to do, so I put the thing on the side of the house. And where do I put this? Where do I put my feed line in the coil? I don't know. I'll put it in the middle. And I operated. So I'm on 40 meter CW with a 23-foot aluminum pole trying to work stations. And I'm calling people that are loud in my receiver, and nobody's coming back. So by golly, I'm going to work somebody. So I started calling CQ. I'm going to call CQ until somebody hears me. And that's when I noticed the distinct smell of melting electrical insulation coming into my room. And then I started seeing smoke coming out of the ventilation hole in my receiver and my transmitter. And that's when I learned about standing waves. Well, fortunately, I had another ham operator a couple doors up. He was an electrical engineer, and another guy at the end of the street, and they were able to straighten me out and get me fixed up with a decent antenna and got things rolling along. So I was able to work stations. This picture over here in the top right is the station where I started working DX, an old Viking 2. It's a really great transmitter, mostly for AM phone, but it worked. I was at CW only, and the Drake 2B. Back in those days, I was able to amaze my friends with my Drake 2B, because if you take that Hallicrafter's SX100 and pound your fist on it, you might end up on another band somewhere, because it moved a lot. And even if you breathe too hard, it'd change. But yeah, I could pound on that Drake 2B till I was blue in the face and it wouldn't move, and amazed all my friends that came over to see me. And then the station at the bottom here, I was out of radio for quite a while, about 10 or 15 years after graduating from college and getting married and having kids and moving. So I got back on with the TS 120 and got back on the air. Notice the common thing in all these pictures is my Hallicrafter's Hallicrafter speaker, which I still have in my station today. So it's been there ever since the beginning. But how times have changed since 1961. Back then it was CW and AM phone, AM heterodynes all over the phone band, limited RTTY, because RTTY was those clunky old machines that they had to use. Everything was tubes, no transceivers, no computers, no DX reflectors, no digital modes, no cell phones. They even had banned countries. You couldn't work anybody in China or Indonesia in those days, but it didn't matter. Nobody was on from there anyway. So Soviet bloc countries, you had to be careful what you talked about, because everybody was listening to what they were saying. So it was pretty much the basic stuff. There was no work bands, no 30, 17, or 12 meters. We got on the 40-meter phone band. Foreign broadcasting started at 7,100, and it was all the way through. But the good news was there was no HOAs, no land use restrictions in those days. So you could put up any kind of antenna you wanted. And there's been a lot of strides made since then in commercial antenna design. Well, well, where was this guy? Whoops, I'll go back to that. I had no idea who this was. I was on 20 meters one day. I don't know why. I was tuning around, and that's what I just heard. I heard that CQ from DJ7IA. I didn't even know where he was. I had to get my AWL handbook to find out where DJ was from. But he ended up being my first DX contact in 1964, and I still have his QSL card. And that was a pretty cool thing. That's when I started. There's a notable QSL that I have. This is one that I'm really proud of. This is the contact I had in 1967 with Ernst Krenkel, RAEM, who was a Russian hero because he was a radio operator on a ship that you see on the right side here. It was frozen in the polar ice, and he stayed at his post and operated the radio and saved everybody. And he was given an honorary call sign, and I worked him in 1967, got this QSL card. There's a couple of other rare QSL cards I dug out of my box when I worked Peter Wan, and I remember working MLA meter CW to the 100 watts. That was cool. And then the Scarborough Reef operation in 2007. Yeah, hopefully somebody will go back there. Okay, back to the current time. All right, we're back in the current time now. So last I worked 5-band DXEC running low power in 2008. It was a long trying to work 100 countries with low power on 80 meters is a real accomplishment. So I was pretty proud of that. This is my station today, K3 and an Alpha 89. The amp arrived in 2018. Some people ask me, Jim, why'd you get an amp? I mean, you were doing so good on low power. And I say, well, several reasons. One is I operate contests, and since I operate with my club as part of a team, I want to make as many contacts as I can. And I like to run stations. I don't want anybody to chase me off my run frequency. And when you're running high power, that doesn't happen. Some people have tried, but they usually go away. And then also I discovered as my country count got up there pretty high in the 300s, I was in some pretty big pileups on some of the DX. And so having an amplifier sure made the difference. And I don't have anything to prove anymore because I already got my 5-band DXCC on low power. Well, you can't work them if you can't hear them. Back when I was a young guy and I was thinking about buying an amplifier and all this fancy equipment, some of my mentors told me, Jim, you'd be better off spending your money on a good antenna because you'll get 3 dB worth of signal strength out of a decent antenna that's properly placed. And they convinced me that simple antennas are no slouch. For example, a dipole at a decent height, about a half wave up, if you can do it, does well. And verticals with an effective ground work well too. You can have a vertical with lots of ground radials, or you can have 2 to 4 elevated radials. I've used elevated radials about 6 to 8 feet off the ground on the fence out here in my backyard. That worked great. If you have trees in your yard, keeping antennas away from pine trees is probably a good idea because they tend to suck up RF. But always good to use good coax and quality connectors. And I found out that I can minimize coax shield radiation and eliminate some of the noise coming in from my neighborhood by using common mode chokes. So if you would go out back and see on the eaves of my house where my antenna lines come in, I have these ferrite ferrites on my all my feed lines, and they make common mode chokes. Now, when I put these on, I didn't come into my radio room and turn on the radio and go, I didn't have a reaction like that, but I did notice a reduction in noise coming in from the antennas. And I did notice I have a reduction in interference in my house from my radio getting into things just by having these common mode chokes on my feed line. So they do work as advertised. Antennas I've used over the years, dipoles, verticals, half squares, quad loops, rotable dipoles, I converted a CB antenna to 10 meters as a ground plane and stuck it on the side of the fence and worked great. That was during the peak of the last solar cycle. Inverted Vs. I had great luck with an inverted L for 80. I use that in a lot of places that I live. You can slap a tuner on it and use it for all bands, and it works great. I had a little 2-element mini quad. It was a commercial antenna. Moxon rectangle. I put a couple of Moxon rectangles together for 10 meters and made from PVC and a couple of turnbuckles and some wire and stuck them up in a tree about 30 feet and made 1,200 contacts in a 10-meter contest a number of years ago. And it was the cheap antenna. I think I had $10 into that one. So those work good too. And then Yagis, of course. Now, I didn't have a tower here until 2010. So question comes up, where did I put all these antennas I just talked about? Well, I had them suspended from trees or between trees. You can use a slingshot. I learned in my 20 years as a field day coordinator that you can do pretty well with a slingshot and some fishing line and some little fishing weights and shoot your lines up in the tree to get wire antennas way up high. And that worked out pretty good. I do that here. I did that. I was out there in my backyard a couple of weeks ago, moving some wires around. I had a 45-foot Rowan steel push-up mast on the side of my house that I used using the famed Armstrong method to turn. I had some poles fastened to a chimney using a mast and a TV mount. I had wires strung inside attics, and I had antennas mounted near the ground, verticals. So I've used various types of antennas. This is what I have now. It's my current setup outside. I got 55-foot TX455 tower with a 412C3E on it. So that gives me 2 elements on 2015 and 3 elements on 10. And I've got an inverted L for 80 and a 30-meter dipole at about 45 feet. So I live in Auburn, as I said, and so Sacramento is just down the hill. Sacramento has an altitude of about 30 feet above sea level. I'm 35 miles east of there, and my altitude in the front yard is about 1,500 feet. So, it's a little better here than down in the valley. So when I put this presentation together, they asked me to include this information about how I work these 2 most recent rare DX on 30 meters, because I ran at 100 watts. I took my 30-meter dipole and I oriented it so that it would favor these 2 stations and had it up at 45 feet. So it was up about a half wave, and I got in there and did pretty good. I worked 3Y0J on CW through a DQRMer, and I worked FT8WW on FT8 after waiting a long time, and eventually worked him on 20 on phone and CW. But I didn't have to have a lot of power, and I didn't have to have a great big giant antenna to work these 2. So, but it took perseverance and, dealing with noise. Well, the noise floor, I think we would all agree, has increased over the years as electronic devices have shown up. They are in everything, and control panels for appliances, switching power supplies and TVs and plasma TVs, although those seem to be going away now. Electric fences, solar panel arrays, and electric power lines. I've certainly got my share of noise here in my house, and I put ferrites on all the control panels for all the appliances in my house, and that reduced the noise a lot. And all you need to do is put ferrites on power cords. So on the next slide here, here's some of the ones I have in my house. The one on the left here is a ferrite I have on our security alarm system in our security panel. If I ran more than 800 watts on 15 meters, I'd start chirping the alarm system, and my wife would get kind of excited about that. So I put this ferrite on the power line here, and that seemed to cure it. The one on the right, this is a air freshener that's in our bedroom, and I was on a CW one day running my amplifier, and my wife called me on the phone. Apparently, my power was getting into the power line, and this thing would start. It would start and go through all 3 speeds and then shut off. And then it would start, go through all 3 speeds and shut off. And she was sleeping in there. That was driving her nuts. So I got a phone call. So I slapped a ferrite on the power line, and that seemed to take care of that. Well, finding DX. Where do you find DX? Well, you can get on your radio and do active listening and tune around. That's the old school method. You can also get on DX reflectors like DX Summit or VE7CC. I have VE7CC running on my laptop all day while I work remotely from home. And so I have VE7CC running on another computer all day to give me an update on what DX is on. And you can look at operator comments in there to sometimes tell you where they're transmitting. But one of the sites that I really enjoy, and if you've never seen this site, this is a great website. NG3K's announced the Expeditions website, complete with links for spots for certain stations. And that's the email address there. It's one I've been using for a lot of years, and it's a lot of great information there. There's also online publications, DX World, Daily DX, and DX News. It'll give you an update. Your local club may have an email reflector. We have an email reflector for the NCCC. And it's important to know where the gray zone is at any given time, because gray zone operating is a great way to work DX. The challenge is running low power. If you're running low power, you already know this, you're usually stepped on. Bigger signal comes on your frequency and just wipes you out. So getting your signal in their clear spot is what you need to do. And typically propagation to DX has to favor your area, because if you're not, if propagation to your area isn't where that DX is right now, it's going to be tough. So learning where the propagation window is for your area to various parts of the world is something you just learn by getting on the air and operating. That's just one of the reasons I like to get on and operate in that DX marathon. So I find out by doing that, where does each band open and to where? And gray zone maps, I have a gray zone map on my computer out in the station. I would be given this out in my radio room, but I don't have a air conditioner out there. So it's about 105 degrees out in my shack right now. So I don't want to be out there. So I'm here in my little office. So running low power, the idea is to get through the pileup before the station fades away. And hopefully you can do that. Sometimes I call the DX and they give their call sign one time and the DX doesn't come back to anybody and they don't sign their call again. So my advice is don't just, if you're listening to the DX station and he hasn't come back to anybody, then get back in there and keep calling, because, he's still searching for somebody to work, most likely. So just calling once isn't gonna do it. So knowing propagation is important. You need to ask yourself, what's reasonable for making this contact, getting through with a limited time available. And propagation software, if you have that can be a useful tool to give you an idea of when certain stations are going to be on, when you can work them. From California, it's pretty easy to work North America, South America, Central America, Oceania, and Eastern Asia, pretty much on anywhere, anytime. Europe can be pretty easy on the high bands unless the K index is 3 or higher, and then the solar path shuts off. It's tougher on 40 and pretty tough on 80 unless you have a good listening antenna. Africa has lower signal levels, and the East Coast has a better chance of working Africa. However, it works out for us at certain times of the day. And polar stations, they have lower signal levels, and the East Coast has an easier time there. But anyway, it doesn't mean that we can't work them. We just have to know when the propagation favors us. So now I'm going to get into how I go about working DX. So for pileups, these are pretty much stations operating from rare places. Everybody needs it, or a lot of people need those. So the pileups can get pretty large. And in my years of operating, I've discovered there's probably 3 ways to work DX stations that have a medium to large pileup. The first method is I call the brute force method. These are the guys that have big antenna installations. They have great locations and high power. They can just sit in one place, use brute force to get through. They know they're loud. They know they're going to get through. It's just a matter of how long, usually not very long, and they, do well. Or you can stay in one spot and hope that the DX finds you. I call that the brute force method without any force. And I hear some people do that. Or you can do what I do and actively work the pileup. And the operative word here is work, because this does take work to do it. So how do I go about doing that? I got 3 slides here to talk about that. So the first thing you need to do is pay attention to what the DX station's instructions are. It says up 5 or up 10 or however many, whatever he's saying, you need to pay attention. If he's calling another station, then you need to wait until he's calling QRZ again. But the thing to find out is, where is he working stations? And the way to do that is use your second VFO. And so when he comes back to somebody, turn on your second VFO and go look for him. So on my K3, I can just push the button in and get on my second VFO and spin the dial and see if I can find that station, that DX station is working. And if it's a big pileup, sometimes that can be tough, but if it's not so big, it's a little easier. But the idea is to find where that guy is working, where that station is he's working, and where in the pileup he's at. And I've discovered that pan adapters aren't very helpful for this. You think that they would be, but everybody's still calling the DX even if he comes back to somebody. So on the pan adapter, all you see is a bunch of signals. You don't know which one is the one coming back to the DX. So it's best to do it with your ears. So what I do is I try to find a station that the DX is working, and I either zero beat with that station, or I usually do is move up the band just a little bit, because most DX operators go up the band. So I figured, well, if I move up a little bit from this guy, maybe I'll work him. And that seems to work out pretty good. Now, sometimes the DX will work multiple stations on the same place. So that's why you have to pay attention and find out and listen on your transmitting frequency, or listen to that guy the DX is working. Sometimes they'll stay in one spot because people are doing the same thing I'm talking about. They found it where the station as the DX is working, and they called right on top of that guy when the QSO was done. And so if it's not too bad and the DX operator can work stations on that spot, he doesn't have to move his receiver anywhere. So it'll stay there for a while until it gets too noisy. Or you can look for the end of the pileup and transmit just a little bit higher. That works too. But you really need to listen to your transmit frequency now and then to see if you're still in the clear, because if you're running low power, you're easily stepped on. And a lot of times in pileups, people aren't necessarily paying attention to where they're transmitting. They're just spinning the dial, and they're putting their transmit signal somewhere in that 5 to 10 kc range where the DX is listening, and whether you're there or not, they probably don't even know. They may not even hear you. So you need to call the DX if they haven't come back to anyone. Like I just said this a minute ago, just don't call one time and think that that's going to work. And if you can kind of get a feel for the operating style of the guy on the other end. What is he doing? Is he tuning up and then back down? Is he tuning up and then going back to the bottom of the pileup and going back up again? Does he listen in one place for a few QSOs before he moves on? So it's good to know that too. And that's what you get when you're actively working a pileup and listening to what's happening. Well, question comes up, well, what if you can't hear the stations the DX is working? This happens sometimes because you don't have propagation to the same places that the DX is hearing. So this is when you need to pay attention to DX reflector posts for operators that say, I worked them on such and such a frequency. Or if the DX says up 5 to 10, or whatever it is, you can put your signal in the middle of that range so the DX can find you whether they're tuning up or down. But you still need to listen to your transmit frequency once in a while to see if anyone else is on top of you. So that's my suggestion for what happens in that situation. Well, here's a little pictorial to explain how I work. And I put this into practice when I worked VP8 SSI in 1992 on 40 CW. That's South Shetland Islands. South Sandwich Island, sorry. Highly needed in 1992, and the expedition went there. And I had a 40 meter dipole and 100 watts at the time. And sure enough, VP8 SSI was on, and he was on CW, and all the big time DXers were on trying to work him. And some of the call signs in the pileup I recognized. I knew they were operators with big towers, big antennas, running high power. I didn't have a chance in the world of working through that pileup, but I noticed that by careful listening, that everybody was operating within a very small range. They were all piled up within 2 or 3 kcs. I call it they were all having a pissing contest. All these guys, I knew what was going on. All these big time DXers are trying to see who was going to get through the pileup first. So they have bragging rights. So they're all bunched in together. And I tuned my receiver 2 or 3 KCs up, like this little mouse here is in the picture, and there wasn't anybody there. So I kind of went up about 2, 3 KCs where nobody was. And I put my little call sign in there and he came right back to me. Man, was I proud. I just beat out all these hotshot DXers that would, and running 100 watts on a wire antenna because they're all fighting each other on, I can imagine what the DX was hearing on the other side with all these high power signals. It's probably just a big batch of, if you've ever been on the other end of a big pileup, it's just a lot of noise. And you do your best to try to pick out a part of a call sign or a letter or anything, just so you can at least try to, but sometimes, it's can't even do that. So, well, what if you're working DX on a contest or you're running, you have a DX station that's running simplex? This is a little more challenging. This can be tough for a low power station unless the propagation is in your favor. So the environment here is a lot of stations calling at once on the same frequency. And what the DX hears is what I just described, is a lot of sound and maybe partial letters or parts of call signs. So a trick that I've used for CW is to slide my transmit frequency up just up a bit or down a bit, maybe half a KC or so. And that has my signal coming up at a different tone than the other people at all 0 beat on the DX. Sometimes that works. I've worked some pretty good DX doing that. And another phone trick is to slide your VFO up or down while you're talking. And sometimes that works too, because it catches the attention of the operator on the other end. You're trying to do something that catch the attention of the guy on the other end. So trying to do something different. You can't compete with a big, if you're in a big pileup with a bunch of loud stations. Now, what if you find yourself in a packet pileup? I call this a calling frenzy. If you've been in a contest, you know what I'm talking about. You'll see a post on the reflector, and the next thing you know, all the big contest stations and around the country are all of a sudden all in the same place calling this DX that just showed up. And what I found is that if you can't get through and after 5 or 6 calls, and what I do is I just put that frequency in memory. I write it down on a piece of paper, and I go back to operating the contest. And I'll come back later within maybe 5, 10, or 15 minutes, and the pilot's pretty much gone now. And working that station is now pretty easy. So if you're in a contest, you don't want to get stuck calling a station with no results, especially if you're in one of these kind of things, where the likelihood of you getting through in the short term is not very likely. So better to go off and work and make some points somewhere else and then come back. And that works for me a lot. Now, this may be controversial for some folks, but in my opinion, FT8 and FT4 was probably the best thing that ever happened for low power operators. Notice I'm not saying it's the best thing that ever happened for ham radio. I'm saying it's the best thing that happened for low power operators. And FT8 and FT4 came along at the end of cycle 24 when the solar flux was around 60 or 70 or so. It was awful. So I got into working FT8 because that's where the DX was. So this is me working 3DA0AQ back a few years ago on FT8. And the nice thing about FT8 is you can see the signals. There's all the signals on the band. So if you're not familiar with FT8, this little red bar here, that's where my transmit signal is. And this little green bar over here, that's where the DX is. So you can actually see the signals. Now, operating FT8 or FT4, some people have said that they don't like FT8 because it's robot operation. Well, maybe there's some people that can do that. I've heard people say, well, you can just turn on your computer and your transmitter and walk away and can come back at the end of the day and see what you work. Well, maybe some software engineers can do something like that, but that doesn't work for me. If I get on, you can get on WSJT and you can call a station and you can walk away to go get a drink or go to the bathroom or something and come back a few minutes later, but it times out after about 7 or 8 calls. So it doesn't work. Now, maybe I might have worked the station in that time, but basically you still need the same skills working DX here on this mode as you do anywhere else, because you need to get your signal in the clear. You need to pay attention to who the DX is working. But like I said, you can actually see the other stations and where they're transmitting, and continually calling is actually the norm on this mode. So stations are out there calling and calling. Working DX on their frequency is typically considered bad form for FT8 because this ends up creating chaos on the DX frequency. So working split is kind of the norm. Now, one of the things I noticed about WSJT is and this is where active listening on the pileup is important, because every once in a while I got to stop and not transmit and see what's going on my transmit frequency, or what's going on near my transmit frequency. Because one of the anomalies of WSJT is that if there's a loud station right next to me, software has trouble decoding stations that are very near to a loud station. I have this happen on DX a lot of times, or I'll be listening to the DX station and some guy will come on, so I'll call CQ with a +3 signal, and all of a sudden I can't hear the DX anymore. But he's not on the same frequency, but he's close enough that it just wipes the DX out. So you need to check your transmit frequency every once in a while, because either the other operators can't hear you or they aren't paying attention, which actually is kind of common on this mode. So operating FT8 Fox and Hound. This is the common mode for DXpeditions, and the most recent adaptation now is Super Fox. If you listen to K8R, who's operating from out in the Pacific right now, he's running Super Fox. What Super Fox is they figured out a way that they can run multiple signals. They can run up to, I think, 8 streams, and they all run the same power as if you were running one stream. So that was the problem of running multiple streams on Fox and Hound, is it split the transmit signal into multiple parts. Now you can run it as many streams as you want, pretty much, and they're all, if you're running 100 watts, they're all 100 watts, which is a huge improvement. Anyway, if you're going to run Fox and Hound, you have to go in the Files Setting Advanced tab and click on Special Operation and then Hound. And running Fox and Hound requires that you transmit above 1000 KC, because if you're below that, the DX won't hear you. Now, there is a variant of Fox and Hound called MSHV. I won't get into what those letters stand for. It's a Fox and Hound kind of a hybrid, but it's not Fox and Hound. If you're running Fox and Hound and the DX station comes back to you, it'll take your transmit signal and drop it down to where they're transmitting, and then you'll work them on their transmit frequency. MSHV, that doesn't work that way. You can just work them wherever your transmit signal is. So one of the anomalies is a lot of operators on FT8 thinking that, these guys are running they're running FT8 and they have to be above 1000 KC, but if they're running MSHV, you can get below them and call and still work the DX, and you've got a lot better chance because hardly anybody's down there. How would you know that? Well, you can go on their website or their qrz.com page, and usually the expeditions will tell you what their operating modes are and what their plans are and how they go about working stations on FT8. And you can also pay attention as to where other stations are working the DX. If they're working DX on their transmit frequency instead of being taken down to the DX frequency, then you can pretty much know that they're running MSHV. So DQRM, this is a problem that's certainly gotten worse over time. It's been really frustrating. We all have to deal with this, unfortunately. My suggestion is try to avoid jumping on the DX transmit frequency to say various things to the DQRMer, because the reason for that is now you're part of the DQRM. Whoever it is that's doing this has now enlisted you to help them out. And, I get it. This is hard, but, yelling at the guy causing the interference isn't going to change anything. And it gives them what they actually crave, which is attention. It's easier to try to just deal with it and work the DX to the interference. And this is how I worked through RA0J on 30 meters CW through some guy that was sending random CW on the transmit frequency. Yes, it was very frustrating. And I had to ask for a repeat from through RA0J for my call sign, because I only got the first part of it, but thankfully he did it and I worked him. Now, if the DQRMer is a key down type, well, that's easy. You just wait them out, because they have to stop eventually. They're going to burn up their transmitter. So I just wait those guys out. Sources of information. A lot of information you can get. DX publications, QST, the National Contest Journal, ADR blog webpage, qrz.com. The announced DX operations website from NG3K that I mentioned previously. Other club members in your radio club, DX conventions and AWRL conventions. And does anybody have any questions for me about what I just shared with you all? Uh, that's pretty good. I did that in 45 minutes. That's what they gave me at DX University.
This is Mike NA6MB. When you say other VFO, you mean on another receiver, right? You listen to the DX in one ear and the pile up on the other ear, right?
No, actually what I do is I have my second VFO, my K3, and so I can go back and forth between my main VFO and the remote VFO by just pushing a button on the front dial of the transceiver, and it'll take me to my other VFO, and I can tune around with that one and listen in, and then
Okay.
I'll go with the button, and so that's the way I do that.
Yeah, I got hooked on two receivers when I had the first radio that had that, and so I put the DX in one ear and the pile up in the other ear, and I tune around with the pile up with the second VFO, but it's in another receiver, which really works well.
Yeah, that's another option. I don't have the second receiver on my K3. I didn't want to spend the money to have to get the extra synthesizer and the extra receiver. It was like going to be that's like $1,000. I couldn't rationalize it. So I use the old fashioned method of using my remote VFO. But what you're saying was it probably work better than what I do. Yeah. That's why I say what I do isn't necessarily the best way. It's just the way I do it with what I have available.
Yeah, I had Yaesu's FT 1000, 2000, 5000. They all had dual receivers. Now I have a K4, which is a really beautiful radio.
Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah, I'd get one, but I can't go to my wife and say, gee, honey, can I spend $5,000 on a new radio? Even though they are beautiful. Yeah, that's all I wanted to sell you. They're pretty awesome. Yeah.
I mean,
But I've upgraded my K3 to K3S, so I've done as much as I can to get it as upgraded as I can. And it works great. So I
where I
do
got
that.
my K4, I won it at the International DX Convention last year.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
But they got the money out of me. I bought a KP of 1500 to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I do notice that the Expeditions still use K3s. And as I was listening to some of those the Expedition talks at Visalia, most all of them were using K3 radios still because they're easy to transport. They don't weigh anything and they're easy to put in cases and move around. So
Hey, Jim, this is Lou KW6Q. I was interested in the DX Marathon. I kind of operate like you, a small antenna and under about 50 watts right now. But the DX Marathon sounds like fun. You start out again at zero in the beginning of each year. Is that a formal kind of thing? I'd never heard of it.
well, that's just the way they have it set up. They call it, that's why they call it a marathon because everybody starts at zero on January 1st, and you see how many countries and zones you can work by December 31st. So it's set up that way.
Is that
Um,
through the DX Club or ARL? I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it.
That's
Pretty
through
cool.
CQ. That's through CQ Magazine. Although CQ Magazine isn't publishing anymore, but they have their own website, so you can put in DX Marathon or CQ DX Marathon in the search box, and it'll take you and it'll explain all the details about how their event operates.
Yeah,
And then
thank you.
they even provide a spreadsheet on their website where you can download. It's an Excel sheet where you can keep track of all the DX at your work. So
Okay, cool. That sounds like fun. Thanks.
yeah.
Anybody else? Jim, what's that? Oh, I was going to say, you kept saying KC, kilocycles.
Oh, yeah, kilohertz. Yeah. I'm an old guy.
Me too. Megacycles, kilocycles.
Yeah, that's what it was back in the old days, and they changed it to kilohertz. So yeah, some old habits die hard.
Your novice was 1 year non-renewable, right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
The old days.
yeah. It was back in the old days. You had one year to renew to a general class, and
Or tech.
or tech, and yeah, with the tech you didn't have to get another code test. If you're going to do general, you got to do the 13 word per minute test.
Yeah.
And then back in those days, it didn't matter if you were a general, you had full privileges to all the bands and frequencies, and then until they passed the incentive licensing some years later, and then you had to upgrade to higher class. Yeah, things were quite different back then.
Yeah.
Jim, thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk, and I'm sure everyone here enjoyed it. Thank you for stopping by. And you can add one more DX club to your list. You become an honorary member for 1 year to the San Diego DX Club.
Oh, cool.
You're giving a lecture. We
Yeah,
have
I lived in San Diego back in 1974 for a couple of years and worked at I don't know if you guys old timers in San Diego may remember Western Radio and TV Supply. It was in downtown San Diego. I worked there for about a year. I was in charge of the ham radio section there. And I worked there for a couple of years, and I went to school at Mesa College there to start my business education. And then I decided to go back to Cincinnati and go back to my alma mater and finish my college work. And then I ended up here in Sacramento. So, but I sure love my time in San Diego. What great weather is down there. Yeah.
been kind of hot the past few days, but I live up in Escondido and it was 98 today. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're inland.
right.
Yeah.
We have a couple of housekeeping items for the club. We have a new member applicant, K6RO, radio operator, who's been here a number of times in the past. He has a conflict on, so he can't come now. Here, I'll let him talk about it.
All right. His name's Larry Shapiro. He's up in Fallbrook. Some of you guys have been around a while, probably recognize him. He was big in LA for a while, and he's a big DXer. And he came to a lot of the meetings before COVID. And then COVID came and he hasn't been back, but he wanted to join the club. And in the past, we've counted, if you've been here a couple of times, that's what's required. You had to be here a couple of times. And I don't know if any of you remember seeing him that know him, but anyway, so he applied to be a member. And he's if you go to his QRZ page, it's quite informative. That guy's done a lot of stuff. So anyway, so we all right. So by our bylaws, we have to take a vote to see if we want to bring him in. So yes. And his check was already deposited, so I'd have to cut him a check back if you guys want to pass it. All right, so I'd move that we accept him into the club. Do I have a second? Second from Gail. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, no opposed. All right then. So we'll take care of that. And back to the press.
Great. Thank you very much. So we have one new member. This club has really been doing quite well. Every month we add one or two new members, while other DX clubs around the country are really floundering. I look at Southern California DX Club as kind of our sister or brother club, if you want, and they are really having a tough time right now. So whatever we're doing something right, and get out there and try and get more members and invite everyone to come to our meetings, either on Zoom or in person. I think we're doing a great job here. We have meetings scheduled, lectures scheduled all through the rest of the year. So it should be a good year. I next wanted to open the floor for a roundtable, and we have a few visitors here. I'll let them introduce themselves and say something about themselves. Go ahead.
My name's Steven. Call sign is Kilo Juliet 6, Bravo X-ray November. This is my first time here, and I've been general class since last year and worked 2 meters to 160 on a weekly basis. High bands usually right now. And thanks for having me.
Thank you.
next?
Usually starts down the end of the table and just goes around.
Oh, gotcha.
What's that?
Okay.
That can be jerks. You probably see if I can get this thing moving. All right. Sitting right next to me here is my grandson, 10 years old. And we've been this summer working through the DWRL Tech manual. And so right now we're into components of the radio, which is the toughest thing for me and harder for me to relay to him, but he's doing really well. So we're hoping to have him have a tech license, probably in the fall here, get a license for him. And my hope is then that I can push him towards CW because his grandfather doesn't do CW yet. And those youngsters, they suck that stuff up. And so if he could learn CW soon, that's my hope that he would do that. And then we work on something like a general license, whatever. But as you know, as a tech, CW, he can work a lot of the bands so that he can't do, on phone or whatever. So anyway, so that's the plan here. And he seems to be real interested and he's looked at all my gear and I'm hopeful that we'll pass something along so that, look, there's not many youngsters in this room. Got a youngster there. How's it feel to be called a youngster, huh? Anyway, so that's the plan. And I've got a couple other grandchildren that just moved to Texas. Maybe one of them's kind of shown an interest, but I think if this one sparks it off, then I might be able to pick up two. So if I can do 2 for 1 exchange here, one old guy, 2 young kids, I think that's a good for the group here. All right, that's all I have. Okay, why don't we go this way? Danny.
Man, and good luck there, Dominic, on your endeavor there to get your technician. Well, first of all, I'll say hi to Ron and Steve up there and all the guys. Thank you, Jim, for your presentation. It was most informative. I spent a lot of time running 100 watts or less myself, and I just find it a more enjoyable amount of power to operate. And my log periodic kind of helps me along. Can't really talk down on that. That's been a great antenna. As far as activity, not a whole lot lately. I have a weekly schedule with a friend up in Wisconsin. Bands are just bad as far as I'm concerned. Every time I get on there, so we end up having a QSO and on our cell phones. It's pretty bad, but anyway, that's the story. I'm moving it on. Go ahead, Steve.
Steve, H6RSH. Where I'm doing. It'll open for this next meteor shower that we're having here next month. And Mozambique, I can't get. Madagascar, I haven't been able to get. Force me.
Tom and 60OJ. Haven't done a whole lot lately due to health problems, but we're going to try and get back out to the shack. Work my radio. I wanted Visalia 2 years ago, 7610, and got the PW1 behind it. So if I need the extra help, I have it.
Yeah, I run 100 watts or less. I got an 84-foot horizontal random wire, and I've worked the world on FT8 and chipping away at single sideband. I live in Coronado, so I got the Pacific Ocean that helps me out quite often.
Lou KW6Q. I love QRP. In fact, in the 80s, that's all I ran was 2 watts for most of the time. Wanted to mention though, an elevated vertical with a lot of ground wires, 10 feet up. Really, is this working? Okay. Yeah, well, this is in the 80s. Okay. 80s in CW and really worked. In fact, I worked all zones in about 200 countries at that time. But now with FT8, I've got to agree with Jim. FT8 is kind of like making it easier. I run about 50 watts now, and you can do pretty well even with just a vertical like I have. But like I say, elevated vertical with ground wires seems to really work well.
Hi, Steve, KE6FV. Ever since I heard the presentation given by Eric several months ago about 6 meters, I've really gotten excited to get back on 6. So I've worked WAS on 6 and FT8. I've worked 32 countries, including European Russia, on 6. And it's, again, with FT8, is really achievable where I'm working stations that are minus 22 dB. And the idea of trying to do that with CW, forget it with phone, but even with CW, it would be totally unworkable. So, speaking to Jim's point about low power combined with FT8, it's really, I think, a huge step forward for amateur radio.
Michael, KB6D, nothing to report.
Tom, W0NI, no report.
And Jerry, W6KIN. I heard K3 mentioned several times, and there are three K3s for sale on the USS Midway. So if anybody's interested, they're priced a little on the high side, but still, for somebody who's interested, that's a good radio to start with. So.
This Bud E6BH, and I've been just pretty much, since it's been hot, spending pretty much all day, every day, just sitting there staring at FT8, fiddling around, doing other stuff. And then also been hunting this one DXCC guy, Lord Howe Island, which should be a chip shot for us here from San Diego. Normally anything down in South Pacific. And but he hasn't been around. But he showed up last night on 15 meters sideband, and it was really noisy. But he heard me on the first call, and he had me in LOTW this morning. So woohoo.
Yeah, welcome back, LOTW, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of mostly back up on the running, not unlike the hospital up in Escondido. But Mike, NA6MB, we have been traveling a lot, so not a lot of on air. I've done a little FT8, but we just did a trip to I'll let Gail tell you more about the YLRL, Young Ladies Radio League convention in cooperation or combination with the what was it, Western Rockies division or whatever it was, convention in St. George, Utah. And I talk about warm. It was warm there, 115 degrees sometimes, and luckily it was air conditioned. So they had a power failure at the dinner on the Saturday night dinner. But we took I was going to put the HF in the car, but I had hand surgery a couple of weeks before that, and I couldn't do dexterous enough to do it. But we did take 2 meters and talk to a few people on 146.52 along the way. When we were up in Bryce Canyon, really high, we talked to somebody that was about 70 miles away on Simplex, so that was kind of fun. And talk about who was it over there that said that they were trying to work Saudi Arabia, and they wouldn't answer you. Just I'll let Gail tell you about talking to Saudi Arabia, trying to.
K6GO, and those Middle Eastern guys, politically incorrect because I respect all that. Oh, but if they look you up and they see your YL, they won't come back. They won't USL. And I finally worked Lebanon. just before our trip. So it was and YLRL, their 85th year. So they've been around a while. and they partnered with them. So it was a really good convention. And Bark, I haven't sent you any pictures yet, but I'll try to get to it. I promise. And we really had a good time. It was too hot. I'll never go to Utah again or move there.
In summer.
But our Chicago family met us, and doing the national parks is always fabulous. Always, always. But it was a really good convention. And the people there were from all over, and a lot of good presentations. And Mike was telling you, so Gordon West sets up this great, great presentation with this
Tesla coil and lightning and all this stuff. Just before the power failure, he was.
Yeah. It was crazy, but we had a really good time. And Steve, thanks for checking in from the land down under, and great talk. You know what's nice about these Zoom talks, Jim? It's just like we're all chatting with you. You know, you give your formal presentation and people ask questions. We're just having a nice chat. And I like that. It feels good. So anything else? Okie doke.
Oh, hi, Randy, KQ6RS. Got on sideband just a couple days ago on 20 meters and worked Romania, Wales, Alaska, Dominican Republic, and the Netherlands. And yeah, band is quite open. This, I know I've probably told many of you, this buoy that I launched that works on 20 meters Whisper back in November still is working. It is now 700 miles southwest of the big island of Hawaii. So it's still cruising around, sending its 100th of a watt 24 hours a day. So, well, no, I mean, it's gone from San Diego to Hawaii in what, 8 months. So it doesn't go very fast, but it keeps going about, I don't know, half a mile an hour. But so, yeah, but it still works. Nothing's gone wrong with it. That's the amazing part. So.
N6 BTF, we don't have.
Thank you. We'll go to our online folks. Ron, WA6YOU, anything to report?
Okay, thank you, Bob. Ron in Fairfax City, Virginia, way out here. And not much to report other than we did download the Super Fox. It's working great. I was able to work K8R twice on 2 separate bands. Looking forward to the Jarvis Island DXpedition. Jim, your briefing was just absolutely fantastic. I run low power for 62 years now. I've run just 100 watts in an inverted V, and we've done quite well. So we have 260 confirmed on FT8 and FT4, and I'm enjoying it. I sure agree about the low power. It works great. So we'll see you guys next month. It's really enjoyed that briefing tonight.
Steve, go ahead.
Okay. Jim, I really enjoyed that. And I feel a brotherhood with you because I started in 1961 like you. And are you hearing me okay, by the way?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. And Jim, my first radio was that Night Kit Spanmaster that you had up on your first photo there. Whenever I see somebody with one of those, I feel a real brotherhood. I bought my first soldering iron to build that thing, and it's 63 years later, everybody, and I'm still getting a thrill out of ham radio. I really am. And these comments about FT8, now I'm a serious contester, and I hang out with world-class heavy-duty contesters. And when I tell them I'm operating FT8, they just reel in horror, like, that's not ham radio. Do we really want to talk to you? But I'll tell you what, I enjoy it. And I don't see the shrinking of ham radio at all when I look at FT8, because everybody I work on there, I look them up on QRZ. There's lots and lots of young people on there. And I like, for my situation at my stage in the hobby, I'm a VK, which isn't rare DX, but it's rare DX. So but it is DX. So when I put out a CQ on FT8 pointing on Europe, I get a pile of 15 or 20 people call me. And on FT8, I can look at that screen and I can see all those signal reports in all these different directions. And I get a real handle on how my signal's getting out and how it's radiating. And I've learned more that helps me in contesting now from FT8 because there's so many signals coming all over. It's been really helpful. And like I said, there's a lot of young people in there. And Jim, when you're talking about those early days of AM, and I wish I could sit and talk to you all afternoon about this because I was in that time when sideband was coming in. Remember that? And I remember getting on those 80-meter AM nets at night and hearing all of that mess. And then one of those big guys had come on with a Globe King 500 or one of those, and the whole thing just goes quiet. And all you hear is a fan running in the background, And I just dreamed of being one of those guys. It never happened, but it still was really a thrill.
It was supposed to be the death of ham radio, they all said. Oh my gosh, we have to switch to sideband. Oh my.
Yeah. Well, I switched my camera a little bit for Jim. You can see some of my vintage gear up there. You can see I got a Lafayette receiver. That's the one I did in most of my early operating. Then I got an SX111 Hallicrafters, and by high school graduation, I moved on to sideband at that National NCX. You could probably appreciate a lot of that gear there. So, all right, I guess I'll shut up and say Gail and Mike, thanks as always, Gail, for sending me the invite. And Danny, I love seeing you every month too. So thanks everybody for letting me join.
73, Steve. Thanks for stopping by. Bob, KA7IGN.
Well, if I remember how to unmute, I'll be good. I'm late because I was outside actually watering. I got to keep my front yard alive. I'm changing it up a little bit, so I missed the presentation, but I see that it was recorded, so I will get to watch it. But I have nothing new. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, 73, and thanks for stopping by. It'll be on YouTube, as Tom JOJ says. Bob, K9RHY.
Hi, hello everyone, and welcome and greetings from the Rocky Mountains. I really enjoyed Jim's presentation. I can see so many parallels in my growing up in DXing the way you did, Jim. I started in 1959, so I got 2 years on you. Not that it makes a whole lot of difference. One comment on QRP work: I've always thought that life was too short for QRP, but there's so many folks around who enjoy it. By golly, keep doing it. Just keep doing it. It's fantastic. No real DX news to report. I hope everyone's enjoying the bulletin that I'm putting out every month, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody again in August.
Great, 73. Jim, do you have a final for us?
No, not really. I was just going to comment to Steve there that Span Master is what got me into ham radio, because I had a buddy down the street that got that as a Christmas present. He put it together, and we would sit in his room and he'd tune in all these foreign broadcast stations. I thought, ooh, that was cool. So I asked my dad to get me one for Christmas, and he thought it was going to be the $25 wasted, and I would never amount to anything. Well, little did he know that 60 some years later, I'm still at it. But I put it together and it didn't work. And I took it to the guy that lived up the street, the ham radio guy that lived 2 doors up. He was an electrical engineer that worked for Crosley in Cincinnati. And so he looked at it, and I had some bad solder connections and some stuff, and he went through there and fixed it up for me. And I started listening to CW on there, and I learned how to copy code before I even took classes. So
yeah, Jim, there's parents supporting young people in radio is such a big deal. I ended up with a 40-year career in electronics. It all started with ham radio because my dad paid for that Span Master to get me started. So.
Yeah. He supported me pretty good. He put up with all my stuff with wires.
Yeah, me too. TVI, mom and dad were hearing TVI, and they let me operate.
Yeah.
Me too.
But anyway, thanks for letting me participate here. I've been glad to do it. So good luck to you all and work on DX.
Yeah, thanks again for your talk and stopping by, and feel free to Zoom in anytime we have a meeting. You're more than welcome. Thanks again. Does anyone have any old business for the club tonight? Any new business? Oh,
Sure. Interested in shirt, I guess. Yeah, Ron is interested in a shirt, medium, medium, and he likes the color that I'm wearing. So if I understand that correct, is that right, Ron? Okay, QSL. So.
it does all the.
That way he can hear you.
Yeah. We're working with a company called Gold Medal Ideas in Illinois, and they do all of the shirts for the Palomar Radio Club, Palomar Amateur Radio Club. And they've been a little bit slow moving. I think we're finally going to get our page up on the website and also in our newsletter so that he can order directly. And that way he can make the deal with them and tell them exactly what he wants, pocket, no pocket, what he wants for his name and call, colors, etc. So that's coming shortly. We've been trying for this for months now, since before the first of the year. And so I'm not sure what's going on, taking so long. And I don't know of really any other companies to go to, because I think it's a fairly small market, and to get reasonably priced shirts for that they'll do on a fairly small run would be difficult. I know Bud has had some problems in the past, so it's coming. So is Christmas, but it's coming. You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks for everyone for coming. Have a great month. Stay cool. I think the little bit of sporadic E that we've had on 6 meters is going to start waning, but we might have some meteor shower activity coming up, and the sunspots and solar SFI have been real high, but we've had so many darn flares that it's been the conditions are very variable. So hopefully the sun will quiet down, but still keep the number of sunspots up. So 73, see everybody next month.
Okay.
For the cheese balls, cheese. Yeah, part of the cheese, the balls.
Right. Just the ball. Yeah. It hailed from Oregon and so cheese. Cheese balls. All right. When my grandson picked the first one here, JJ